Good morning, colleagues. Can I just start by saying thank you very much for agreeing to start an hour later. It is wholly my fault, but I had a funeral that I really felt I ought to go to. And actually, Joe Tucker's gone hence we've got his substitute here today. He's still there. It's one of those wonderful Methodist funerals where Bartolomeo Bush Choir were there and did the old boy, real justice. So I'm grateful to you for agreeing to that. This morning's meeting, members, is recorded and is being cast as we speak. So I'll be grateful if you could just use proper titles rather than Christian names or nicknames, so folk can follow the meeting as we go through. So first of all, apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair. I've got apologies from Councillor Clark, Councillor Tucker, who sent Councillor Wilkinson as a sub, Councillor Watson, who sent Councillor Pennington as a sub, Councillor Lofthouse, who has sent Councillor Elspear as a sub, and also apologies from Councillor Cottle-Huntington.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Hackney,
And Councillor Hay.
you're chairman today.
I thought, why am I not surprised at that?
Oh, he's a member of the council.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Then item 2, to agree the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 27th of January 2023, pages 5 to 10 on the agenda. Anybody wish to raise anything?
I raised under future meetings, Chair.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Yeah,
Councillor.
well, as you know, we've had a slight dispute over the constitution, and I would like it to be agenda for another time, or for the next meeting, which will be beyond us probably, is that we shift the constitution to say that the meetings will run from after the elections and the full council meeting to run 12 months then.
With the municipal calendar rather than the calendar year.
Yeah, rather than arguing about what day we're working to, it'll be straightforward in that respect.
So we can get that sorted out in the first meeting of the new council.
Yeah, but it will
Is
need to be in the agenda.
Is that second?
I'll do that.
Thank you. Those in favour then? Make that. Anyone against? Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. In which case, would somebody like to move the minutes as amended? Move. Thank you very much. Second. Those in favour? Anyone against? Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Members, we move on then to the well, really it's one item on the agenda, and there is a covering report at the beginning, but rather than having a big debate on the front page, we have an introduction and then actually deal with them item by item and try to resolve them as we go along. Otherwise, we'll end up going round circles and go back to issues time and time again. So I don't know, do you want to introduce the covering paper?
Chair, just a thought, declarations of interest.
Oh, declaration, sorry.
I haven't received any, Chair.
Are there any declarations of interest?
Sorry, thank you.
No.
Yeah,
Please.
thank you, Chair. Okay, could we have a presentation?
Just a
We've got a
moment.
loading.
Sorry.
Yeah, so thank you, Chair. You'll find your report on page 13 or running from page 13 of the agenda. Just going to give a brief context, and then as you say, we're going to go through topic by topic, and then we have the opportunity, I think, for members to discuss after each of those topics, how they're feeling about those, ask questions and make a judgment about the value, etc. of each of those.
That's working.
So we've just been through the agenda, and the substantive item that you've got in front of you today is the progression of the scoping of that partial update of the North Devon and Torwich local plan. So just in terms of setting that context, you'll be reminded that in July last year, we were tasked with going away to consider whether or not a comprehensive update to the plan was still the right approach. And we've been carrying out a relatively comprehensive programme of work since then to understand the performance of the plan, to understand members' perspectives, and to get a grip on the wider context. That culminated on the 27th of January with the JPPC meeting, where they resolved, on balance, to recommend to both full councils of North Devon and Torridge to proceed with a partial update to the local plan. The full context of that recommendation is in Appendix 1 to your report, as there were a number of other sort of substantive elements to that, but the principle was about proceeding with a partial update. So following on from that, on the 22nd of February, North Devon Council resolved to follow the advice of JPBC and take forward all of those recommendations as were set out in that report, and to move to a targeted and partial update of the local plan. On the 30th of January, Torridge District Council considered the same. However, they referred the matter back to JPBC, so to this committee, to seek full recommendations on the way forward, which were intended to go back to the April full council meeting. The reason for that was that they didn't feel they had enough information available to them about the scope of that update to be able to make an informed choice about it. Now, I understand that unfortunately, due to PERDA, it's unlikely that it will be able to proceed to the April meeting, and that will have to go to the first meeting after the elections in June.
I'm happy to confirm that.
Thank you.
We will not be going on the April day.
Okay, thank you, Councillor James. Just to set some of the wider context that we have debated before, but just so it's in your minds when we're talking about the topics and the scoping, we still do have uncertainty around our 5-year housing land supply position. That clearly could have an implication on the soundness and how we determine our plan to be up to date or not, and also could have an implication on one of the topics, which is around the allocation of small sites, for example. We have local government elections coming up in May, which you'll all be aware of, which obviously could change the priorities of the two councils. So I think we just need to be mindful of that in terms of that context of where we're looking to pursue certain member priorities, council priorities at the moment in terms of the scoping of this. Will they stay the same? Proposed national planning reforms. We suggested that we will get a new national planning policy framework in spring 2023. The consultation on the draft of that closed on the 2nd of March, and we made joint representation as the two councils following a really stimulating session with Joint Planning Policy Committee to feed into that. So we'll see what comes out of that, I think, but there is some uncertainty with that, and particularly around some topics such as wind energy. And then we've got proposals for longer term structural changes that are advocated for 2024, new plan making system, and a new regime around how we may look to put our plans together. We don't know whether that'll come forward or what that might look like as yet. So we need to be mindful of that sort of dynamic policy context and that uncertainty, but that was picked up in the recommendations that were taken forward from the previous JPBC to keep all of this under review. We've got that potential challenge of transitional arrangements to that new plan making regime that we need to be mindful of. The suggestion that we need to be possibly preparing a new plan within a 30-month period as of November 2024, and the need to potentially submit any partial updates by June 2025. So that gives us a potentially constrained period for our work programme on whatever we might want to take forward. So just to put that into a bit of a timeline for you, you can see this year some of the key potential challenges and potential context aspects of it. So the new elections, the elections in May, potential for the formation of new council with different priorities, proposed publication of a revised national planning policy in spring, and the anticipated royal assent of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, which would potentially put in the framework for the new plan making regime. We have our 5-year anniversary of the adoption of the local plan in October 2023. Why is that important? We have to have formally concluded our review on the local plan by that stage. And it's potentially the end of the proposed protection that they're suggesting may come in for the 5-year housing land supply. Then we have biodiversity net gain, which is coming in as mandatory towards the end of the year. Into 2024, this just shows you the potential and beyond into the sort of potential timelines for the revised plan making regimes. November 24 and the proposed introduction of new style local plans with that rather demanding 30-month period to adoption. June 2025, where we're looking to have to submit any old Stour local plans or any partial updates to our plan. They would need to be adopted by December 2026. And then if we were proceeding at any point, and if we were triggered that we were required to start in November 2024 with a new Stour local plan, the deadline for adopting that will be April 2027. So that just sets a little bit of context. We've been through that a number of times before, and I think at this stage I'm going to hand over to Sarah Jane.
Thanks, Ian.
Thank you.
So members, as you know, today is around looking at what we could or couldn't achieve through a partial review and looking at some of the topics that we've identified that we could take forward, and to get your views on the value that taking a topic forward or elements within a topic as through a partial review, sorry, that would then need to go back to Torridge Full Council, as we've heard this morning. The topics that we've identified and that you can see on the screen have come from a number of sources. So we've gone through a technical appraisal of the North Devon Torridge local plan. Members have seen the results of the PAS toolkit at previous meetings. We've also done a programme of engagement with yourselves. So we've had a number of workshops where you've highlighted issues to us where you feel the plan isn't working as you would have hoped, or where there are shortfalls. And what that's resulted in is a list of 10 topics, they being active travel, climate change, design codes, fluvial change management areas, coastal change management areas, housing, retail and town centres, rural economy, traveller accommodation and tourism. We will also touch on agricultural buildings, although not as a separate topic area this morning. As the chair has identified already, what we'll plan to do is take you through these topics one by one, and after each topic, get some debate around that and the value that that specific topic could add in a partial review moving forward. Next slide, please. At Appendix 2 of your report, members, there are scoping tables which set out each topic. And for each topic, we've gone through a number of issues for you. So we've described the issue, we've identified where that topic was raised, so whether that be through the PAS toolkit, through that review of the plan, or whether it's come directly from yourself separately. We've summarised the national policy and the existing local plan policy, and then identified what we could look at in the scope of partial review and what would be out of scope. So what elements within that issue could only be considered through a comprehensive review of the plan. We've looked at what evidence would be required to support that in-scope information, the staffing timeframe and cost attached to that, the value it would add, the risks of not doing so, and then we as officers have recommended to you whether we think that particular topic would add value in a partial review. Next slide, please. So I think before we launch into the individual topics, it's worth just reminding members what we're hoping to achieve from this morning's meeting. So there were two recommendations set out in your report for you. I'll read them out just for clarity. So 2.1 is that we're asking you members to consider and advise on the potential scope of a partial update plan, having regard to potential benefits and costs of each topic that we'll outline to you this morning. And then the second part of the recommendation is it would be really helpful, members, if when doing so, we could think about what prioritisation we might want to give to individual topics. That being that if at the end of this morning we felt that all of the topics would add sufficient value, but actually there's not going to be time as we move forward in preparing a local development scheme to consider all of those topics, which ones you might need to prioritise. So the first topic that we're going to look at this morning is housing. On the slide today, you can just see a summary, but if I could refer you members to page 25 of your agenda in Appendix 2, that's where you'll find the table related to housing. I'm not going to go through it in detail because I'm sure you've had regard to it already, but we'll just go through the key matters. So the first part of the topic talks about the issues that's been identified around housing. From a technical standpoint, we have the emission of first homes, which has been introduced by government, but of which our plan is silent. And then there were key drivers raised by yourselves. So we know that to date, we've had the inability to demonstrate 5-year housing land supply. As members will be aware, that's something that we are reviewing and hope to have a statement for you shortly. And also viability issues around our ability to secure the necessary affordable housing and package infrastructure required to secure that we secure through our housing allocation. You'll see that the advice from PAS was that we must seek as a priority to ensure that the tilted balance no longer applies and that we work hard to secure that 5-year housing land supply. And then we've touched upon ways of how we might achieve that. We've then set out the policy framework for you. So we start with the National Planning Policy Framework and then move through into the strategic policies in the local plan currently, and then the development management policies. The strategic policies, as we discussed with you in a number of our workshops, look at that settlement hierarchy for the distribution of housing. These are policies STO 6, 07 and 08. So they're looking both across the urban and the rural areas and the scale and distribution of that new development across North Devon. That includes your defined development boundaries, etc. You then have 3 more strategic policies which look at the balance in the market, affordable housing on development sites and affordable housing on sites. And then you can see your DM policies sat there for you. So that's DM 23, which is residential development in defined development boundaries, and DM 24, which looks at housing in rural settlement. We are limited by what we can do in a partial review. So we wouldn't be able to review, for instance, a hierarchy. We can't go to through a partial review. I'm sorry, we can't look at matters that would go to the heart of those strategic policies. But what we can do, and you can see before you there in terms of the in-scope of a partial review, is we could first of all look to address that matter of first homes not being included in the local plan. But we could also look at new small site allocations. That would be if we don't have a 5-year housing land supply. And we know our current position, that we don't have one, but we await to see, as we review our 5-year housing land supply, what our statement will look like going forward. If we didn't have a 5-year housing land supply, then we could look at that small site allocation to see if we could try and address that in that way. So looking to put some additional allocations in the plan to help add value to that 5-year housing land supply position. I think members need to be aware of that, but as I say, we can't categorically tell you the position with this morning. What is out of scope, and I've touched on it already, sorry, is the matter that you've raised related to viability considerations with regards to development not achieving affordable housing. We wouldn't be able to review anything related to viability as part of any partial update. And I'm sure, Ian, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding. So then we take you as to who would undertake the work if we were minded to go forward with those 2 elements of housing that we could look to address through a partial review. And it's there for you that we would need to engage consultants to provide updated housing needs evidence in support of the new first homes policy. And then your officers would continue on an established work programme related to the 5-year housing land supply. And members, you'll know that we're doing work on the healer already. So we've had our first healer panel. They've considered existing sites into the 5-year housing land supply statement that I've referenced. And we've got a second panel which would look at the new sites that are being put forward to us. So that work would continue as is. The timescale is there for you. So in terms of first homes, we're thinking of 6 to 8 fairly short piece of work to assist us in that regard. And as I said, the work with the healer already happening and would continue. Cost-wise, we're talking about 10 to 15,000 pounds, and the added value, I think I've already discussed with you already. So in terms of our recommendation to you members, we think that if you were much so minded that to look at both first homes and the allocation of small sites, depending on the 5-year housing land supply position, would be sensible to move forward with in a partial review. But it's really now for you to debate that topic and ask any questions that you have.
I know that there seems to be a feeling that we ought to be looking for some more small sites, because a lot of our 5-year land supply issues have been around these big being controlled by national house builders, and that we felt that there would be more flexibility within the plan if we could get some small sites. Jeremy, I think.
Thank you, Chairman, and I am in favour of this, but can I just step back a little bit and maybe a question for our officers, and just to better understand, perhaps for members, 5-year land supply problems. We can't count the allocations unless they're building out. Is that where we are? Just want to, before you answer, I'm just thinking about government changes, proposed changes, and is there any indication at all that as an argument for us to put forward to say we do have sufficient land supply because we've given planning permission for what we noticed, what we've given planning permission for, although we don't have a statement from anyone to say they're going to build it out, but it is available, that would form part of our argument going forward, that we do have a 5-year land supply. I'll park that, and then can I, sorry, Chairman, I just wanted to ask the question, establish a little bit of understanding, and then I would be supporting this.
Check.
Yeah, I mean, we could spend an hour on this.
Absolutely. I think the simple answer is that it's complicated.
I think you know that.
and that it's
just a quick answer.
Yeah, in terms of allocations, sometimes we can look to include them in the 5-year housing land supply if we've got that evidence that shows that there's a reasonable prospect that they will deliver within that 5 years. So that is open to us, but we need to be able to evidence it, and that's always the problem with this deliverability and that challenge of proving that deliverability. And we all know what happened at the Burwood appeal. We all know the difficulty of that. I think we all still stand by the legitimacy of this 6.24 years that we thought we had at the start of that. The reality is we're coming to the end of a programme of work now to understand where we are with that 5-year housing land supply. Until we're able to report on that, we genuinely don't know the position on it and which side of that line we will be on, or how close to which side of that line we will be on. That should be a matter of weeks. So we're close to that, and I think that will clearly have an influence on the scale of sites that we may need to look at.
So the advice is to members, to politicians, is keep lobbying MPs and ministers that this needs to change subtly to them counting land we've provided planning permission for, because it's then in somebody else's fault. Thank you.
Just briefly come back on that. Yeah, we and certainly as the two councils through our consultation response, that was one of the matters that we raised about the challenge of demonstrating deliverability and the fact that we had allocated sufficient land to meet our needs.
It's not our fault.
It's really, it's some work to do there, isn't it, Chairman? Thank you.
I think the important thing today, and I'll come to Mogwai, the important thing today is to make sure that any work we do will fit whatever we've got to do in terms of government changes, isn't it? And the first homes thing and the small sites are something I feel that, we're going to have to do anyway. So,
Yeah, I'm absolutely on board. You know,
And I hope that the promises about the 5-year land supply become reality, but you know, at the moment, we are where we are. And we've got to carry on working. And I must say, being involved in the HELA process, we councillor James, you know, we were putting sites back, and that's not helpful, you know, with the experts around the table. And the uncertain housing market at the moment, there are signs that it's picking up again, I must say, but you know, that hasn't helped in the last few months either, is it? And it's given that bit of pessimism to people to put their plans back a bit, perhaps. Yeah. So, right, Councillor Wilkinson, then Councillor Hames.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Harry. Obviously, I'm coming in very much in the dark, so I'm just covering today. But I welcome this looking at small sites, but what is the definition of a small site? Does it go down to a single dwelling? I'm here representing really the views of the rural aspect. I mean, it's increasingly difficult to build a single dwelling in the rural settlements because of the constraints set by what is a settlement, how close does it have to be to a settlement, etc., etc.
Some of the,
Cheap one last one.
I mean, we did talk at a previous meeting about how some of our DM officers in dealing with applications can be more flexible, imaginative in terms of helping local communities. But we can't change the basis at the moment in a partial review of the actual hierarchy, which is where the rural settlements and the villages sit at the moment.
I think it's DM 24, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that is the one that concerns
rural.
about the lack of flexibility in it.
I think that those are issues that we've recognised, but we're limited what we can do if we go down the partial review route. So it's important that we, in a partial review, do the stuff that ain't going to be wasted and can be used whatever government do to change policy. I think that's the key for this morning. Councillor Hay.
Yeah, obviously it's very disappointing about the viability issue, that the scope of the partial review won't allow us to look at that, as I understand it. Is there any scope within the HELA process to strengthen the scrutiny of viability to sort of pin down developers right at the very early stage more than is happening at the moment? I mean, is that a possibility?
I think it's happening.
Yeah, Chair, thank you. So we are mindful of the viability of the HELA process, and I think that's an area we've tried to strengthen between where we are with the HELA and where we were with the strategic housing land availability assessment last time around, the sort of similar exercise. And we do have a development viability expert who sat on the stakeholder panel with us, which hopefully will help that. But we do have to be mindful that national planning policy, as it stands at the moment, does allow for developers to adjust their obligations dependent upon viability. So our hands are to a certain extent tied around that. We could try and be as robust as we can. We're testing that, and certainly I think through a complete new plan, we can strengthen that and be more robust next time round, hopefully.
Well, I mean, there are elements like we're looking at land drainage, etc., all the little bits and things. You look at the HELA process, which could be strengthened, couldn't they? I would have thought.
Absolutely, we're trying to make sure that we've got the best technical assessment that we possibly can to inform any new allocations. And clearly, the more information we have about those constraints or those abnormals that may be associated to individual sites allows us to feed in when you're making choices about those sites, potentially to think about which ones are going to be the cheaper ones to develop, and therefore a lot more likely to deliver the package of obligations that you're seeking.
Well, about more participation in planning. The other thing, can you just clarify the recent national planning proposals which we responded to? I can't remember whether there's anything about viability in there. The things we looked at a few weeks ago.
Yeah, not significantly. In terms of that aspect of it, unfortunately, there wasn't any proposed changes through the short-term MPPF that we would expect in the spring. What they are talking about as part of the wider structural reforms is to reduce the burden of section 106 and move to a new national infrastructure levy. So a sort of an evolution of the community infrastructure levy.
Members, the recommendation here is that we do this bit of work on first homes and continue working on trying to find some small sites, which I don't think either of them would be wasted work, would they? Jeremy?
One more comment, Chairman. We shouldn't forget that some of these small developments, they come with people wanting to do it with funding. And so funding isn't your problem.
Yeah.
Just permission is the only thing that
I think there's some truth in that too, yeah. Members, we have chat?
Can I just say, my concern a little bit is we get 5-year land supply and we go back to the village boundaries, is how we deal with small site development in villages that are already built up to their boundaries. That's on the assumption we get the 5-year land supply.
Yeah.
So will we be looking at putting that into a policy, that small developments in villages and the ones that are listed as villages, I would like to see a full review of the structure, hierarchy structure, but we're not going to get that within there.
No.
And that's a failure a little bit of doing it like this, but, that is my main concern, is that most villages are building outside the boundary already. And so where we want small developments, which is mostly villages rather than towns,
No.
well, where it's going to happen is more in villages in certain towns. Are we going to ensure that that facility is available?
I think that's the bit of work we can do. Isn't it?
It's something we can explore, isn't it? I think. I think I can't give you a definitive answer on that. We don't know what land may be available. If we were looking at allocations, we would need to be mindful of visions and strategies for individual places and making sure that we're keeping in accord with those, and obviously to engage with those communities.
I do share Councillor James's views on the hierarchy needs looking at. But we're going to have to do that in the next few years anyway. But in the meantime, let's get this first homes work. See if we can find some small sites that we can, get local builders involved in local communities to support, because that's what it's about, isn't it? Yeah, we have got an exception policy on the edge of boundary. We're happy if somebody like to move the recommendation on that. Thank you, David Warden. Secretary, there's a vote. Yeah, thank you very much. We move on then to retail and town.
That's right. Next slide in, if you don't mind. Thank you. The next topic, members, is we're looking at our retail and town centres. So again, this time, if I can refer you to page 32 in the report, again, Appendix B. So the table is set out in the same way, so you can see the issues that we're going to look at. So town centre hierarchy, town centre boundaries, frontage shopping areas, consequential changes of the use class order and allocations to support town centre expansion and regeneration. In terms of where the issues were identified, again, set out in the table, but it's really about trying to understand the plan's response to the changing patterns of the use of town centres and retail habits to ensure vital and viable town centres moving forward. We've seen a considerable change in the high street since the local plan was adopted. We've summarised the national policy framework for you in the table, and then, as before, looked at the strategic policies of relevance to this particular topic. And the main one, our main strategic policy, is ST12, and that's town centre hierarchy. There's then a set of DM policies that sit below that DM policies 19 to 21. Now, in terms of, again, we are more limited by what we can do through a partial review, so we wouldn't be able to explore that town centre hierarchy. But what we can do is have a look at our DM policy. So we could be looking to respond to the changes of the use class order and the primary shopping frontages if we considered that would add sufficient value. In terms of matters that would be out of scope, I've touched already on that town centre hierarchy, but we would also be able to look at local plan allocations because often those allocations are going to the heart of spatial visions and then linked back to strategic policies, and where that is happening, we wouldn't be able to address that through a partial review. I've touched on it already, but in terms of the evidence that is required, our needs assessment that we had supporting the existing local plan is significantly out of date. So that assessment was dated 2012. And whilst we, through a partial review, we wouldn't be reviewing that evidence base, because the results of that are something that we could only be considering through a comprehensive review. It really is only small elements of work that we could be doing around this topic through a partial review, and that is the changes to the use class order. And our DM colleagues would tell us, I think, that that's something that they are working through anyway as the development management applications come forward. And we could look to review our primary frontages, because I think there would likely be changes in that regard. So if members wanted to do that, then that is something we could do through a targeted review of DM19. But as officers, we are suggesting that would bring forward limited value.
So really you're saying is that DM officers can deal with a lot of the issues as they come up, rather than us getting bogged down on work on this topic.
Yeah.
That does seem, and it does, there are some real issues in Barnstable that do need tackling, but we just can't do it in this review. Councillor?
Yeah, well, we're not going to be able to do everything.
Yes.
The targeted review, from our side, there's little memory in this, we'd leave it to DM.
Yes.
And that will be our view.
Yeah. Councillor Payne?
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, a little bit concerned, some of the town centres in Torrance, I take it that applies to Hosley and Torrington as well as Bideford. Hosley and Torrington have got very defined areas with our town centres. We know where the centre is. But I think we've lost where the centre of Bideford is. I think there's more centre of Bideford up on the south side of the town than there is in the town centre itself. And I don't think the town centre is really retail in Bideford any longer. I think it's more cafe culture and all the other things that will go with that in the future. And that's where the future will go there. I think we need to be able to reflect that in its time to see a slight change in the use of the key areas within Bideford.
I think the change in the class orders do actually give you that flexibility to reflect how Bideford has changed. I think
Yeah, so I think the reality is that in the short term, the local plan allows the sufficient sort of reactive approaches, I think, in terms of the change to the use classes, etc., to manage that in the short term. What probably is required is to think about the long-term future of these places and how we support that better. And that's clearly a much bigger piece of work. And that's a matter, I would say, for when we look at a new plan.
And I think new councils might have different views, and
Indeed.
that is something that we must track.
The towns I'm involved with, which is Hosley and Bideford, we've got ongoing regeneration plans of what we're going to do. And so that will come into play at a later stage. So leave well alone at the moment.
And just to say, Torrance has adopted a Bideford regeneration initiative again.
We're trying not to.
Is that cynical? No. No, that's true. I mean, actually, we've got a very clear vision for Barnstable, which, is beginning to deliver in some places, and we refix that. The recommendation is now on page 35, essentially that we don't put a huge emphasis on this, but we hope that the development management teams can deal with the changing world that we live in, and recognise the class order changes. Yeah. Do we agree to that? Would you like to move that?
Yeah.
Do we? Those in favour? Thank you very much. Anyone against? That's carried. Rural economy.
So sorry, Councillor Price, we've just changed the order slightly, so
Oh, wait.
just to enable, I'm going to finish my section of topics.
You're going to
that
need
will-
to.
No, I'm going to finish the
So we need to go to
topic.
page.
21, yeah,
21.
sorry, members. I think we're just skipping one table and then moving together. The tourism.
And then Helen comes on to the others. No, Ian.
And then the approach today. Right, so yeah, going to the table, because we've just got a summary on the slide numbers. So the issues to be considered under tourism, they are the opportunities to increase the capacity of sustainable tourism, including a review of tourism in the rural areas, having regard to the existing scope of enabled development by type and location, and the promotion of green tourism. Same format as before. So in terms of where these issues were identified, I think when we were discussing tourism with you members, there was a general sense that you felt our current local plan was weak in terms of its policies around tourism and sort of wanted some interrogation of those. We've set the national framework out for you as before, and similarly the strategic policies. So primarily ST06, so that's the spatial development strategy that we touched on previously alongside ST07. But then you've got also ST13, which is looking at sustainable tourism. Any review of the development management policies would be DM17 and DM18, and as we've already talked about this morning, that's where the scope really lies in a partial review. So what we couldn't do in a partial review is to affect the spatial development strategy, so we have to leave the FT policies alone. But what we could do is as I've mentioned already, sorry, some further work around the DM policies and how they sort of picking up on the concerns that members raised, some kind of interrogation around the decisions that have been made using policies DM17 and DM18, and what's working and what isn't, and where there might be scope to look again. We want to work with you, looking at those decisions and what outcomes you might have wanted to achieve, what that would have meant for tourism in the rural economy, and to undertake stakeholder engagement, both with internal council services and other organisations involved in the sector, to see whether there is some tweaks to those policies that might help support tourism and the rural economy further. It is work that we think we could do in-house, so we're talking about sort of 12-week a period of time for this work. So other than officer time, no additional project cost. In terms of the value, it makes a significant contribution in this sector to the Northern Devon economy. So we provide an opportunity for us to sense check how the local plan is performing in this arena, and if appropriate, an ability to alter those development management policies. The evidence that we collect could then be utilised as part of the new local plan as required. So the recommendation on balance, it's considered to be a limited piece of work that could add value to the local plan, but further work would need to be undertaken with yourselves and with the sector to properly explore those concerns, the performance of those DM policies, and what amendments we could then go on to make through a partial update of the plan.
I think it's really important. I mean, the recommendation needs to be, we need to work very closely with our economic development teams, North Devon Plus, and all the other bodies that are dealing with the industry, and make sure we sweep up all those issues. But I know it's an issue that's, I think, common to both councils. But we haven't got the flexibility on some of the initiatives that might come along.
Yeah, Chair, if I could just come in and support this, in so much as we're not looking for a spatial review or anything. I think the opening issues to be considered does encapsulate it. You know, we're looking at tourism in rural areas, green tourism, which is the ones we've had issues with. And there are areas that we could explore, even within DM, in my view. My colleagues might disagree. But, you know, if it supports the rural economy and makes that sort of difference, then we should be considering it.
Yeah.
At the moment, it's very blank, unless it's a new development. If it's a new development, it can't be considered. But new developments can be green, new developments can support the economy. And so it's a matter of how we just slide that into the DM policies as far as I can see. But that's part of it. Yeah.
Councillor Haynes?
Sorry, I can't quite see DM 17 and 18 defined in this presentation here. Is that an impact on the countryside?
Chair, if I may, DM 17 and 18 are around support for tourism attractions and tourism accommodation. two policies that set out the criteria for how we would support those types of development.
So to clarify, what's the concern? That there's a limitation on new build for tourism?
So there's concerns about the potential locations and scale of development that could be supported. And that's been raised a number of times in terms of attractions and in terms of tourism accommodation, and potentially the constraint where you need to have something there that was touched on.
You have something there in the first place to add to.
Yeah.
Because and I can understand why planning officers are very cagey about, startups. But I think very often there are people with good business cases, well funded, that come forward that take some tipping the balance with the planning officer sometimes, for them to go on with the way it's structured at the moment.
That's it. So I think, Joe, about exploring that,
This is about
making sure that we can get appropriate flexibility whilst keeping those checks and balances in place, and just exploring how could that policy look different.
Yeah.
I think we're not saying how much further we could go or not go, but it's something that could be in scope.
It's a very sensitive issue, isn't it? It's to be looked at very carefully. And I can think of some horrible developments recently in the countryside for tourism. The Pethercoombe, for instance, just rather than.
I give you an example in my patch. Got a group of farm buildings and a farm building right on the edge. In fact, one of the farm was part of where now Whistle and Pound Reservoir is. Couldn't be a better site, just off the Exmoor National Park, out of any other landscape values. And it was somebody had experience in the tourism industry, wanted to buy it and develop it to something like 15 units. Set from a sensitivity point of view, it worked. But it took 18 months to go through the process because it actually conflicted with the plan. So the DM officers had to spend a lot of time sort of explaining their position and getting the right evidence to be able to support it eventually. But it was torturous. That's just, anyway. Councillor Payne.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just following on tourism as well, interesting hearing about Wild Dartmoor and the law case now going through Parliament. Access to the countryside is becoming quite enormous, very noticeable on the edges of our urban areas. My parish, Lytton, is a mile south of Bideford Town Hall, and half of the Torres population live in Bideford, Northern Mappin or Western Hope. It's quite interesting, the population demographic of the area. And it's been really noticeable since the COVID. People want access to the open air, and we made a huge mistake in Torres. We closed the boroughs down in the middle of COVID, and everybody came rushing out to the south of the area. And it's been very noticeable. You can see all the paths now more clearly marked because people are just walking them. And there will be more issues about access. And I don't think it's more about access than it is about economic generation, because the guys want to do wild camping. If you look at the Dartmoor situation, Beat No Trace and all the other bits and pieces. And I think that could come to Exmoor, one or two of our more wild places, and this would have an impact on our and tourism here. But it might be economic tourism. It might be people just needing to get out from our urban areas.
Fair point, though. Looking around, there seems to be general support for the recommendation here. Someone have to move that?
Yeah.
Thank you. Moved by Joseph, second by Ken James. Those in favour? Anyone against? It's carried unanimously again. So do we go back?
Yeah,
Go back to rural economy.
Yeah, we're going to go back to rural economy, which is on page 36 of your report. It's a similar frame, I think, in terms of the discussion around the tourism aspects of it. And obviously rural tourism touches on the rural economy. We've separated those two out because of this distinct nature of the policies that we've got in the plan. Certainly the issue was raised, particularly by members, I think, about how we can better support our rural economy, and in particular, the small businesses in and around the countryside and our smaller settlements. And also around the agricultural sector as well, and what else could we do to support that sector. Mainly raised, I think, through our engagement with yourselves, and that was where the issue came up. And then we touch on the summary of the National Planning Policy Framework. And there is a little bit of scope, I think, we feel in National Planning Policy to explore this a little bit further, and the wording that is maybe not picked up quite as well in our local plan as it could be, around recognising that sites to meet local business and community needs in rural areas may have to be found adjacent or beyond existing settlements. So we've got that element of latitude in national policy. And we just need to see how we maybe can explore that a little bit further through our policies. So as per the previous topics, we can't really meddle with our spatial strategy. So policy ST07 and our rural strategy overall there. So it comes down more to what can we do around our development management policies. And I think the one where we really feel that there could be value in looking at is around policy DM14, which is small scale rural economy type proposals. And at the moment, that's relatively constrained in terms of the size of proposals that it would support. 250 square meters, I think it is, of floor space, or 0.1 hectare, I think it is of actual sort of ground site space. So we feel that there's the scope to have a look, as per the tourism policies, about how that might work. We would clearly need to be engaging with yourselves to explore that, with other interests in terms of in the sectors, and with other colleagues across the councils, etc. To understand what those aspirations really are. The engagement would support wider work as we move forward with any new plan as well. So I don't think it's work that will be abortive or unvalued for future development and progression of a plan. And I think our advice is that we would be able to potentially do that in-house. It's not like we need to be going out and getting additional technical evidence to support that. It is really thinking about what it is we wish to achieve in those aspirations. So the sort of officer recommendation is that we sort of target on policy DM14 as part of a partial review and explore what scope we've got to really support our rural economy through that. The other element that we touched on was the agricultural buildings policy that was on your first screen there when the topics were listed. This has come more from our development management colleagues who feel that there's a hole in our plan at the moment in terms of allowing them to have a criteria-based policy to consider the development of new agricultural buildings and understanding how you justify those on the basis of need. At the moment, it's a very ad hoc approach that they have to take, and it would be much more straightforward if they had a clear policy, which would be clearer for applicants and for development management purposes. So, Chair, that's rattled through the rural economy element for you, and I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. This one seems very straightforward to me. I think we recognise, I mean, the figures you're talking about, 2,500 square feet. You're talking about a 4 or 5 bedroom house, aren't you? That sort of
They're very small.
Yeah, so, we do need to look at all those issues.
Yeah, Chair, I could just say our officers know my point of view, because I represent a very rural ward, all around Holsworthy. We've got several very successful enterprises, and I'm having an awful lot of time at the moment when they want to make changes. We seem to be going back to the fact they shouldn't be there in the first place, because that's what our policies are based on. So we do need, farming is changing. I don't farm half the acreage I did, and don't do very much on that half. So the world is changing, and we need to look at how we support rural enterprises. I'm also slightly concerned with the new agricultural buildings, because I started with nothing but a field and a shed. And, I would hate to see that become really constricted about how we do that. There is perfect justification at the moment, or perfect reasons why you can do it, if you can justify it at the moment. I know we've been looking at large scale dairy setups, but then we're running into trouble with the Environment Agency and Natural England and all those constraints. But I think on the whole, we just need to get on and look at it. Because at the moment, rural enterprises should only be farming or forestry. And that's not what the world we're dealing with at the moment. So we do need to look at those aspects and find ways to be more flexible. I know Ian and Helen fed up with me banging on about it. But if we can get the policy right, I won't have to bang on about it.
I mean, the most successful business in my ward, which is a rural ward, is an IT business that Mike Matthews runs. That started at home, started in a barn, and he ended up in Barnstable employing 50, 60 people and looking after local businesses. The add-on, impact of that business is huge. But, without any flexibility to start in the countryside, he wouldn't have been able to afford to do it. Jeremy Atherton.
Thank you, and I completely agree with Councillor James on this issue, but something that's coming in front of me, well, I've got several dealing with at the moment, applications for agricultural barns, livestock sheds, lambing sheds, all this sort of stuff. And some of them are genuine and some of them are actually, oh, we'll get one done just in case we can convert it. And I've got a number of those, and I'm very keen. One of our planning officers is working very well and asking the questions. It's not in the right place. It's not well related to the business. It needs to be, and you're not going to support it unless some of it's prior approval. But I'm very keen that we ensure that there's a proper business plan available and demonstrated for some of these sheds, because they're going up in quite really isolated places, or the proposals are to support a business, and then the business disappears in there. Yeah, and I've even got cheeky monkeys too. You know, one of them's a builder. He's asking me for advice about. I know exactly what's going on here. It's a house they want, and this is the first step to them possibly being able to get it. So business plan, and that's what I've had to do it, because I've done a class here and I've come back with a. You know, and you'll be looking at my extension next month, Chairman, with a business plan. Sorry, with a business
Do you know, I'll be there.
and lots of photographs of livestock.
Yeah. I mean, there is an issue with DM27 where you can build an agricultural building last year and apply this year. A bit like Jeremy Clarkson's restaurant.
Yeah.
No, but seriously, there is a problem with DM27 and we need to plug that gap as well.
Yeah.
I'm not against, you know, there's a lot of, but I mean, there needs to be a time limit or some sort of judgment before DM27 kicks in. Okay, would somebody like to move the recommendation then? Come down.
Oh, you're moving it.
Sorry, do you want to?
We will make a comment.
Yeah, please, do. Sorry, Kat, yeah.
No, certainly, well, just to pick up from Councillor Yatsley's point, there's an alternative point of view comes in here to a certain extent. I was thinking about our last planning committee, when we had an accountant who wanted to set an office out in the countryside. And if you know where Stib Cross is, it's about a mile from Stib Cross. Officer recommendation was to refuse, committee approved. And it was for a county business. And business is changing immensely, and the key is broadband. And if you've got a good broadband connection, it makes 20% difference to your house value. And now we very seldom see part business, part residential use, but there is a huge area here, I think, that we have untapped economic potential we must look into to bring money into the area. So I don't want to say we can't bring, and the business plan is all part of it, but we need to be stronger in attracting financial issues to rural areas. The other one that's really concerning me is that I look at the age profile for our villages. The big business I think we're really missing out on is social care, because we have an aging population and the carers are now moving to the cities because they're getting the same pay per hour when the house prices or house rentals are a lot less. And now we're left with an aging population in our countryside, and there's nobody left in the countryside to actually do the social care that will be required for our future.
Yeah.
And I think we need to look at social care and that type of business. And it is not only a social need, but it's an economic driver to a certain extent. And they say Devon misses out about £40 million a year in entitlements for the pension age group, attendance allowance and pension credits, et cetera, and that brings in money to an area. So there is a balance there to be struck as well.
Chair, did you want to bring in the scope of DM27 into?
I think we ought to, because, I mean, it picks up Jeremy's points too, you know. We need to test it when the prior notice of the application comes in, and then we need to look at how any conditions are tied up with the DM27.
Because obviously with class Qs, there is that protected period that's
2030,
built into the legislation. But obviously DM27, the test is disused or redundant, and I'll frequently ask questions, goes as far as it can to define that, but it is an issue, and I think that suggestion of introducing a policy to guide agricultural buildings has come very much via the DM officers at both teams. There used to be a policy in both the North Devon local plan and the Torridge local plan, which was incredibly useful.
Chairman, in no way do I want to stifle opportunities, business opportunities. We just want to regulate it so we can manage it.
Councillor Wood.
Yeah, I would actually move this then.
Would you include
With-
DM27?
DM 27. I think it's really important at the moment because Many of our farming community are going to really struggle unless they can diversify in different ways. And they're, you know, all in favour of us looking at DM14 and DM27.
Thank you very much. Is that second? It is. Those then in favour? Anyone against? That is unanimous. I've been told to keep your hands up a bit
I
longer.
can't count that.
They all voted
They all
for it.
voted.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. We move on then to coastal change management areas. Very much on the news at the moment too, you know, and we haven't got the problems of Norfolk, but we have got our own problems. So page 44.
Page 44, yeah, thank you, Chair. So this came up more as an omission from our existing plan. It was something that we were certainly aware of already. And we've had the opportunity to be working on a wider project with partners around this in any case. So we don't define coastal change management areas that are the tool that allows local planning authorities to be proactive and to think about how we are going to manage that change in the future. And that's an omission from the plan at the moment. We have very high level hooks within some of our policies, particularly ST03 and ST09, around sort of mitigation and adaptation to climate change and flood resilience, etc. But we don't define those areas, and we don't have the tools, therefore, to be proactive in our management of that. It's very much a reactive approach to it. We set out the summary of existing national policy there, which is about identifying areas within our plan that are affected by physical change, and that could be erosion, inundation, coastal landslip, or coastal accretion. And it's about then putting in place policies to manage development that comes forward, or managing the change to development that we feel is needed to react to that coastal change. So as I say, we have the hooks in our strategic policies at the moment, and in scope of a partial update could potentially be about thinking about how we define those coastal change management areas and then putting in place associated criteria-based policies. I think we do need to be careful about how far we can go with that. We need to explore that, and I think it's not until we start to look at maybe the technical evidence around that to understand what the implications could be for some of our communities and what implications that could have on some of our spatial strategies and place-based strategies. We'd have to see how far we can take it through a partial update, but it's not going to be work that's abortive, because we know it's an important topic and that we would need to be taking it forward through any future more substantial update to our plan. In terms of technical evidence, we were fortunate enough to be party to a wider programme through SWEEP, which was a sub-regional project, working with Natural England, the Environment Agency and Plymouth University to develop a new approach to this and how you define these areas. And we had that work gratis for the estuary areas, and that was published maybe 2 years ago. And we've subsequently commissioned Plymouth University, when we were progressing a comprehensive update, to do the remainder of the coastline, and that's expected to be reporting back fully in the next few weeks, really. So we've got the technical evidence in place. The remainder will be about in-house work, about translating that technical evidence into areas that we feel need to be managed, and then coming up and developing policies about how you do that management. That's work that can be done in-house with engagement with members and with other bodies such as the Environment Agency, Natural England, the Local Flood Authority, Devon Council, etc., and engaging with stakeholders. Now, we feel that there's value in proceeding with that work, exploring how far we can take that, because, as I say, we will be able to take it through in a new plan in any case. And even if we can't get revised policy in place, we can make use of that technical evidence and as a material consideration. So on balance, we feel that as we've got the advanced stage of the technical evidence in place, and we can hopefully include associated policies in this partial review, that we should proceed with it, Chair.
The recommendation is quite clear. Yeah. Anybody wish to speak?
Could I just ask Chair, when you say proceed with it, we will be proceeding with it anyway. Does it need to be part of the partial review to proceed, or are we doing that anyway?
I think there would be value in trying to include it in the partial update in terms of the policy package, is what we are saying. How successful we can be with that, I think we need to explore as we develop it, and how far we can take that without impacting on spatial strategies for places, which is the delicate balancing act there, I think, Chair.
Because there will be some impact on that.
There will be,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that can't be looked at, or it will override it.
But the work will not be wasted.
It won't be
That's the other
wasted.
great step. No, so, councillor Speck.
There is a certain people in the community who park this for hundreds of years, a long way away. The important thing is sweep tells us where we are now. And the point is, sea levels is rising all the time. Also, I think we can really, with things like marshes, some public, if we can build a 6 to 12-foot wall every 20 years, that's going to solve the problem. There are ways to mitigate the problem and also have advantages to the problem. And I welcome the fact that we are grasping this sort of difficult issue, because in Broughton, we see people putting in applications who are trying to move more and more into the marshes, regardless of that. And it was pleasing to see the recent applications turned down by the officers. So I think this work is very important to us, and we're increasingly getting.
Also, the big issues around the boroughs as well, wasn't there? Coincide. Yeah. Anybody else? Got anything on the left?
Just to be wild, really. Are we doing enough in this area? I read that, and it was non-evidence, it was proven, but the Ukraine war, it was suggested that the Ukraine war, and then the consequent rebuilding of Ukraine with concrete use, the carbon release through that process would bring climate change 50 years closer. So our 100-year targets, all these things, I think for a number of reasons, they are underestimated. And we should be considering more, or spend more time considering how we manage that change, because it is coming however much we do to try and push it back. You know, the rest of the planet is coming towards us faster than we think.
Yeah. And of course, increasingly, we've got the issue of what medieval towns that by nature were all sat next to riverbanks at very low levels.
Yeah.
Okay, would somebody like to move the recommendation?
I'm happy to, but somebody else do it.
I'm happy with the recommendation, as much as we get on with the work.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced it needs to be in the partial review.
Didn't he convince, I thought he already convinced you.
No,
So what-
I'm not driving a wedge anywhere here. But again, as I said, I won't say it again, but I mean, we're not wasting this work. It is urgent to carry on with this work, isn't it? So, and we've got the resources to do it. We're almost there. So, been moved and seconded. Those in favour of the recommendation? Anyone against? Again, that's unanimous. Page 51
Page 51, Chair. Yeah, so fluvial change management areas may be something that we've not discussed very much with members up to now. It's more of an opportunity area. So as councils, we were asked if we would like to be part of a much wider Environment Agency project. It's a multi-million-pound project that's being managed by Devon County Council and their flood risk team. And this forms a small part of that wider programme of projects. And it's under the Devon Resilience Innovation Programme. It's package, it's called DRIP. And it's looking at whether or not we can take the principles of coastal change management areas and apply them to watercourses. So looking at catchments and looking at inland catchments and fluvial management areas. So that's sort of runoff and sort of streams, etc., and fluvial. So we've got a package of work that we've got the opportunity to be part of in association with the Environment Agency on this individual project. And we've got an element of financial support through that of up to around £50,000 to £60,000 external funding to look at commissioning technical consultants and getting technical evidence to pilot this new approach. And it would be about identifying some catchments that we wanted to try this on through a local plan approach. The project runs until 2027. So it fits quite neatly for us in terms of our innovative and aspirational sort of environmental credentials, I think, as two councils. And I think it's an area that we can explore. How far, again, we can take that through a partial update, we don't really know as yet, and how that may fit. But it's certainly something I think to proceed with, see whether we could put policies in place around that, to pilot it. And again, it wouldn't be wasted work. We have the finance externally to be able to do that. We have a partnership with the Environment Agency and others to be able to do that. The technical work will be funded. It would be about then us developing that work in-house and working with those partners and seeing where it goes, really, I think. And it's recognised it is a pilot, and the whole idea of the wider project is to explore innovative approaches.
Looks pretty good value for money for each council too, doesn't it? The amount of work involved for the input that we'd have to put in.
Sorry, Media.
Sorry. That's why you're down the front.
Personally, I'm actually obviously a farmer, only a little one, as I said the other night, but I am on the SFI pilot, and we've been working on policy development on this issue in terms of soil runoff and reducing fluvial flooding. And I think it's so important that we do be involved in this because it has a huge effect. One of them is to overload combined drainage systems in villages and towns. And we've seen that in Barnstaple, we see it in Wheeleridge, we get torrential rain, it just can't cope. And then there was some actually nonsense suggestions from some DEFRA officers about how we resolve the issues on dry soil, steep ground, arable land, well, heavy rain and the soil's out in the road, down in the river. And whether we could create ponds to hold it up, but they completely were forgetting that as soon as you've caught it, you've got to get it out so you can catch some more. And I think the only real answer, beavers, you've got beavers, I've got them up my back door now. I don't know how much good. You've got to be able to allow the water to spread out and then take time to come down. It's like a sump system. You've got to be able to do it. And I can't see much sense coming at the moment, but we definitely need to be involved because this sort of thing hits our communities down the bottom end. And it's also an impact further up where we're going to try and do something to resolve those issues. So, but permanent pasture is probably one of the real answers to preventing soil runoff. And of course, it's not necessarily going to be popular in everyone's business.
You live in a house with Colm in the.
I do. Well, my barn conversion is called Colm Issues because I'm on the Colm measures and issues on the springs, of course. There's plenty of water around.
Yeah, I take it that Councillor Yabsley is actually moving this. If he is, I'm quite happy. I think this is an opportunity that we shouldn't miss. And as you say, it's really good value for money.
Absolutely.
And,
we'll learn, if nothing else.
Exactly.
Okay.
Just an issue is that I've got land along the River Tamar, regularly floods, and also my village, which will regularly floods as well. So I've got that interest. Again, I just feel sometimes this is work that needs to be done. It's set up, it's being done. Are we just confusing the issue between the partial review and getting work done that needs doing? Because obviously, as I said earlier, we can't do everything and we're virtually just ticking everything on. So whilst it's really important, it's all set up, it needs to be done. But will there be any constraints that come from being a partial review rather than just getting on with the
But this evidence will go into whatever
So, yeah,
government do to us. isn't it?
I think, Chair, the reason for raising it as part of this is that hopefully it is something that we can incorporate into that partial update and maybe get some policies in there. So it should be in scope of where we're considering that. And it has an impact, as you say, on the amount of capacity that we have. So I think it's about being mindful around that. So we have got these opportunities going on. Clearly, we could walk away from these opportunities if members didn't prioritise them or didn't wish us to. I'm not suggesting we do, but that's why we raise it through here, because clearly it has capacity implications.
Yeah, so it should be part of the overall.
And surely, Chairman, this is helping to keep our plan up to date and live, which we must do.
Yeah. And I'm lucky to live in a village. If Bratton Fleming floods, then we're all doomed. So, it's been moved and seconded that we accept the recommendation. Those in favour? Anyone again?
I want to go with it. I'm not unhappy.
That's a singing endorsement of the recommendation. Okay, now there's the easy topic, isn't there? On climate change.
Climate change.
I was hoping to get it. I was going to appoint a lead member for the travellers. Okay, climate change. Can I just say to Peter Hayes, that stuff you sent last night to colleagues was really, really useful and insightful. And I think, you raise a good point that, it just shows that some people are out far further ahead than we are. And we do need to catch up. Anyway, just say that as an introduction.
Thank you, Chair. So climate change, it's on page 58 of your report. So a whole range of issues, I think, have been raised by members around this and as an important topic. And I think we understand that. I think the challenge is about the scope of what we can take forward through a partial update. So the issues that are being considered in particular here are around sort of the potential enabling of onshore wind turbines, and opportunities and thinking about solar PV and large scale solar PV and how we consider those. So we had a whole range of issues around renewable energy raised, and policy ST16 isn't doing its job, and the members had different aspirations around particularly onshore wind compared to maybe we were when we adopted the North Devon and Torridge local plan. You have a summary of the existing national planning policy context there, which is relatively strong in terms of, I would say, in terms of climate change, but clearly explicitly at the moment is suggesting that wind energy isn't supported unless you identify it, have areas identified as suitable for wind energy within your local plan. They are proposing changes to that through the recent national planning reforms consultation. We don't know what that may look like as yet. So I think we need to be mindful of that in terms of this package of work potentially. In terms of the relevant North Devon and Torridge local plan policies, the relevant one is policy ST16 in terms of large scale renewables. And as I say, that element at the moment that we've got in there that would preclude us from being able to support on onshore wind. So in scope of a partial update, unusually, we do think we could make a change to a strategic policy on this matter because it is very self-contained and doesn't have impacts or influences on the wider aspects of the plan or the spatial strategies around that. And then potentially to have a look at policy DM08A if we felt we needed to around landscape and seascape character and thinking about landscape character and sensitivity around that. So we would have to be careful around policy ST16 though, and anything that may be wider and impacting on the viability of development. So smaller scale interventions on, for example, housing estates and such like the requirements for wider carbon assessments and for the imposition of renewables, for example, on those developments is more challenging because we would need to be opening up our discussions on viability because it could impact on things like the affordable housing percentage, etc. So we're suggesting that whilst frustrating. It'd be very difficult for us to open that up within the time we've got available and the programme potential we've got in a partial update. So it is suggesting that it's more targeted on the larger scale onshore renewables. That we have a landscape character assessment updating progress at the moment. I understand we should be getting some outcomes of that next month. Land use consultants are doing that at the moment. And we will need to explore whether or not we feel the need to update the landscape sensitivity assessment. I think the particular reason for doing so is that we've seen proposals are much larger now, turbines are much larger than they were when we had that piece of work completed. I think it was 2014, that landscape sensitivity assessment. So it is of an age now and doesn't cover maybe the scale of the proposals. So we would need to have a look at that. We're already committed to the update to the landscape character assessment, and that funding is already committed. But we may need to look at that landscape sensitivity assessment and commissioning consultants to complete that for us. Timings of that would then feed into the programme of that work, and we'd need to explore what that may look like in terms of a timeline. Added value, clearly, given the climate emergency and the focus we've even heard about previously around the importance of tackling and managing and adapting and mitigating to climate change. It does feel that there is value in exploring this through a partial update and taking it as far as we can. There are associated risks in that we don't know where the government is going yet in terms of the wind energy proposals in national policy.
Good job we didn't pause the first bit.
And
About the budget.
but in terms of the evidence, such as landscape sensitivity assessment, it's clearly something that we'd be able to take forward and would have value in any case, whatever approach we may wish to take.
And how things have changed in 2014 and people's attitudes.
Indeed. So the officer recommendation is that on balance that we do proceed with reviewing that strategic policies, particularly around onshore wind and exploring those potential needs for changes around onshore solar PV if necessary. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Haynes?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, as you know, I'm lead member for climate change at Torridge, and climate emergency at the club. To remind members that both councils declared a climate emergency in 2019, I think. I circulated an SPD from Derbyshire Dales Council to certain members last night. I apologise for sort of late sending of information. I didn't include everybody because I didn't have the details, I'm afraid. But, you know, I'm conscious, well, we should all be conscious that it's an emergency. You know, we've had 4 years now. We've had unfortunate setbacks with this committee, due to tragic death. So we're late in the proceeding, which is partly why we've gone to a partial review consideration. But other councils have got on with it, and this is an excellent document, an SPD that Derbyshire has done. Other councils, I think some of the London boroughs have done work, and I just feel, you know, we should be looking at some way in which we can strengthen our local plan. We've been told we can't do it by a partial review, but are there other possible ways we can do it, like an SPD? And there's obviously, when we went to the workshops, there's great concern that the local plan that we have at the moment isn't really working. It has, in my view, sort of weak requirements, wording, to encourage, etc., rather than actual try and strengthen things, and to, for instance, in developments, getting carbon zero, getting towards zero carbon developments in housing, more green infrastructure, better transport, alternative transport systems, reducing the need to travel, etc., which are all things which are covered in this, what I think is an excellent and quite attractive document, actually, the way it's set out. You know, we need to get on with it, really. If we can't do it with a partial review, can we do it under an SPD? That's what I'm asking. Though I recognise we've covered just now the things about sea level rise, coastal rise, and fluvial elements. And we just talked about wind energy and making sure that that's developed. But is there a way in which we can look at the other things?
Peter, I was going to suggest that following the ones that you circulated in some of us last night, that we ask, there's no reason, obviously, we're going to go into PERDA, but there's no reason why we can't circulate those and have a dialogue over the next few weeks and ask us to see what else we can do in parallel to ST 16. I think that needs sorting out as well. But I'm with you. I think, we have been looking at our neighbours a bit about the process rather than looking outwards. And you opened your eyes a bit last night with those documents. And I agree with you. I can't see why we can't do a lot of that work. Would members be happy if we actually started that dialogue and get it circulated around?
Yeah, I'm happy because this is another one we're tacking into a partial review. It's a subject we need to be tackling.
No, but this is an SPD.
Oh, well, it would be as an SPD. But actually, it can be preparation for the local plan when we do get to it. You know,
Well, we can do the SPD next year, couldn't we?
a lot of this is tinkering with our old plan. What we're not doing is looking particularly forward on where we want to go. And climate change, it's going to overtake us as it is doing. And if we can do it and get it into an SPD or a local development plan or some other mechanism, we need to be getting on with it and not just be part of a partial review. So
I was going to say, if we do that in parallel to this recommendation and ask some work is done, we circulate those SPDs. I think it was Bath as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, I was going to ask if, is it possible to borrow and to utilise the forests which are in SPDs, and like Cornwall, for instance, they just don't want them. Well, it's not an SPD, it's something else, isn't it? But, there's plenty of evidence and plenty of information on which we can base our own, surely.
Yeah.
I think we're more than happy to explore what we can do around that and to work with members to see how we can take that forward. I think the challenge has been what we can do through a partial update without opening up a wide body of evidence, because clearly we've been focused on what can we do through a partial update. I think has been the focus of this work, and I totally understand where Councillor James is coming from in terms of actually there's more to where we need to go than just that. The challenge is obviously capacities and prioritising that, but we're more than happy to explore that type of work and see what we can do.
Are members content to go ahead with this landscape work, because we need that so that we can make judgment on wind, and then in parallel, would we agree that we look at the SPD and actually get a minute to that effect? I think that would help.
And Chair, it may be, if I could, it may be that actually we do identify things that we could bring into scope relatively easily through even a partial update. Is there an example I was looking at, and I don't know whether we could do it or not, was a tree canopy cover policy, for example, that the Cornwall Council was working on, so that you have portions of amount of tree canopy on development sites, for example.
From the City Council, obviously.
But we could certainly explore in parallel, and if there are elements we could bring into scope, then certainly.
Sorry, I just got Phil Pennington, I'll come back.
Philip.
Thank you, Chair, when you can. Longest term, Alderdice substation up there, the 55-acre converter station that they're proposed on X-Links. I see the planning team have now done a deal with X-Links and get the planning through on Dorchester Council at the present moment. The magic holy grail of, I should say holy grail, I suppose, but of energy is storage of energy and batteries and be able to store at the peak to release it. And it's the same principle as your flooding, basically. When the wind blows and the sun's shining and the same day, we're 90% for renewable energy. And when there's a dull, quiet day, we're back to coal-fired power stations again. And interestingly, Jeremy Hunt kindly said we're going back to nuclear because that's a new green energy.
Of course it is, yeah.
He said that in the financial statement, when he did the budget on Wednesday, so it's gonna be interesting to see where
It's
it's.
very
going.
well about our potholes as
But
well.
you're, yeah, but the policy, I mean, you talk about landscape value and one thing or another, but one of the big arguments is where are you gonna put all these batteries to? And if, you know, you look at the old substation, it's capacity up there that's a problem, I understand, because there's all sorts of things that are going to come in from the Celtic wind, the Moroccan ray, from all the other areas that we may want to put solar panels on and all the rest of it. We haven't got the capacity maybe that's there, but also it's a great land. I can see all the way from Salton Sands and up over Croyd, nearly, Mullica Cross, all the way to Kithill and Cornwall on Tier 8 from the top there. So you've got a balance here that's going to be quite interesting in the policy.
Yeah.
If our first proposal was to put the 55 acre, 75 foot high building into the ground, but your policies are going to reflect our need, not only for a converter station, but also to take an ever crack the tidal conundrum of the Bristol Channel, because if you tap into tidal, then you've got untapped reservoirs that could be.
Members, I don't want to truncate debate. Would somebody like to move that the recommendation here on the paper, but with an addition about exploring the possibility of an SPD, and we'll circulate after the meeting the copies of the two that Peter Haynes has sent.
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Thank you. Say goodbye. Second. Those in favour then? Anyone against? Again, that's unanimous. Thank you. Design codes, page 48.
So we've got 3 more topics to go, so I'm going to run through all of those with you members. So the table that corresponds to this is the chair's just said is on page 48 of your agenda. So the issue to be considered here is the key fact is that the current local plan is silent on design codes as it predates the introduction of design codes in national policy. And this matter was highlighted through the PAS toolkit evaluation of the local plan. So it's not something that's specifically come out of member discussions, for example. The table before you provides a summary of the relevant bits national policy of the NPPF. There's various paragraphs that refer to design and design coding. Importantly, the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill includes a requirement for each local plan to be accompanied by an area-wide design code and for this to be adopted as part of a local plan. There's a specific section or Schedule 7 of the bill, and that's set out in the table before you. And the bill also would require local planning authorities to prepare a local plan timetable, and specifically requires that to include reference to the timing for the design code to be prepared and developed. In terms of our current local plan, we have a strategic policy STO4, which deals with the principles of design, and then a far more detailed development management policy, DLO4, which has a number of sub-criteria which seeks to guide design of possible forms of development. In terms of what would be in scope of a partial review, this would be a completely new piece of work for both councils who do not have design codes in place at the moment. It is a relatively new thing, and obviously a new requirement coming through the bill. The scale of design codes would need to be considered in detail, and the options are plan-wide area, which would be across Northern Devon and Horwich, area-based, so that'd be at the neighbourhood scale, and then site-specific design codes. This would follow through on site allocations to guide development. A plan-wide design code would need to be referenced back to a policy in the local plan, which would have to set out design vision as well. Out of scope of a partial review, recognise that any design code prepared would need to have regard to the strategic policies of the local plan. Just what this would look like in practice, the evidence required. There is best practice set out in the National Design Code, and such work would include analysis, visioning, and the preparation of the code. There will need to be consultation and engagement through that process. Design code work could be undertaken by external consultants or through training of officers. Now, officers at both councils are already starting to sort of upskill in this area. They're, the Royal Town Planning Institute, through their programme of training for this year, there is a specific day on design with officers from both councils likely to be attending that, and the Planning Advisory Service is running a specific training course on design as well. Length of time, again, it's only sort of pilot programmes that we can go on with this, but it suggests a 12-month period, and estimate of costs, again, the limited number of design codes that have been prepared, it suggests you're looking in the region of £100,000 plus to carry out the full scope of the work. In terms of added value, design is a key component. It is something, whilst design codes weren't specifically mentioned by members, design is important to members and officers alike. It's key in terms of achieving good development, and having design codes would have a positive impact in that sense. However, given the estimated cost and time needed to prepare design codes, there would be limited value in doing so through a partial review, given that we do have a national model design code in place at the moment. In terms of risk, the NPPF does set out that the National Design Guide and National Model Design Code should be used to guide decisions in the absence of locally produced guides. So we do have a framework within which we can progress at the moment. Work done now could be carried forward as part of a new local plan. However, the recommendation before you on the screen is that whilst the value in undertaking design coding work, given the significant amount of resources that will be needed and the cost and limited best practice available, it would be preferable to not include design codes in the partial update at this time. It can be undertaken alongside the local plan. I've said we're already looking at upskilling officers across both councils to get us as ready for when that comes in. If we do progress with a partial update, there could be scope to add a sort of simple reference to design codes within policy DM04. However, the actual work on design coding we are recommending would sit outside of the partial update.
Okay. Seems logical. And we did a lot of work some years ago about local distinctiveness, where you actually really hone in on the details of particular communities and villages. But, we haven't done any of that work lately. So I think, in a way, I'd like to think the design code was from a bottom up too, that we get our communities to talk about what they want to see, rather than us producing a document on the top. That's work we could start doing now without any great cost, isn't it? And I think that's something which we could be valuable. But the recommendation is that we don't really get on with this work at this stage.
Not as part of the partial.
So,
I'm happy to go in that. Yeah, so go down below this.
okay, those in favour then? Anyone again? Thank you. Unanimously. Okay. Yeah, travel site.
Okay, so
It's been on the agenda ever since I've been alive. I've been here 44 years, I think we talk about it every year.
we're now on to travel accommodation, and page 54 of your agenda is in appendix 2 has the detailed table. So I'll just run through the key elements of it. So this is an issue that has come out through the certificate evaluation of the local plan, as being an omission from the plan. So the local plan does identify a requirement for 15 permanent traveller pitches and 2 transit sites. So this is based on a 2014 assessment of need. The identification of sites to meet the evidence need was to be addressed through a traveller site allocations development plan document, and this was sort of committed in the 2016 local development scheme. This development plan document has never been prepared, even though there was a commitment and certainly a direction from the local plan inspector. To date, a total of 6 permanent pitches have been delivered between April 2011 and December 2022. Transit sites have not been brought forward. However, North Devon Council have a temporary toleration site for Seven Brethren. There is a summary of existing national planning policy, and that greatest reference is to the government's planning policy traveller sites. There is duty in that to provide 5 years worth of sites against the council's locally set target. In terms of our local plan policy policies, ST20 is our strategic policy, and this sets out the requirements that I highlighted in terms of permanent and transit sites. In terms of what we could do in scope would be to identify suitable and available sites for the delivery of the requirements of policy ST20. That would be over the plan period. Out of scope would be to update that baseline position. So the policy ST20 directs a quantum, and I think to update that would sit outside of a partial review. What is in scope is more looking at finding sites for that. In terms of evidence and an assessment to identify suitable and available sites that meet the requirements of Northern Devon over the plan period would need to be undertaken. It could be informed by the previous traveller site assessment study, which is from 2019. Now, no sites were found through that previous study, but a similar process would have to be followed as part of the partial review. This work could be undertaken by officers or external consultants if necessary, and it's likely, the estimates are that it would take 20 weeks for a traveller accommodation site appraisal to be undertaken. In terms of cost, if it was undertaken in-house by officers, there would be no additional cost above existing. However, consultant costs would be likely in the region of £30,000 if we were to go externally for this piece of work. In terms of added value, it's important to note that the councils can't demonstrate the required 5-year supply of traveller sites at the moment. Applications are consequently being approved for temporary permission in locations which do not meet the criteria of policy DM30. Delivery of transit sites, again, no sites have been identified. Also, we must be mindful of the duty on both councils under the equality legislation as well, and that there are risks associated under that. The risks of not pursuing through the identification of the permanent pitches is relatively low, because it's quite low numbers that we're talking about here, and it is felt that actually utilising the current development management process is working. The evidence that could be carried forward to a new local plan, so the updates to the site assessment could then, it's not work that could not be carried forward into a new local plan. But on balance, the recommendation is the estimated timetable for the completion of the work stream to recommend it to take the work forward as part of the partial review. It would provide the councils with the opportunity to establish authorised sites across the plan area if such sites can be found, and ensure, importantly, that statutory duties can be met.
Something colleagues we've just got to do, actually. Not very palatable at times, but it's something we've got to do. Councillor Chess.
Thank you, Chair. When I first came on 20 odd years ago, Faye Webber was in charge of a section, and those committee members on that worked on in that group. I was one of them, and traveller sites, rough sleepers were part of my duty at that time. Any time a site was mentioned, immediately local people didn't want it near them, particularly the transit ones rather than permanent ones. And it was always difficult to bring sites forward. Obviously, we're notified forward now, so, what can you say?
I think that's fair point. I think that's why the idea of using some consultants to look at it independently, because I think it's very difficult for in-house officers. That as soon as the whiff is there of you going looking on site, then you get political intervention. I think to have somebody to actually do that bit of work for us and bring it back to us, and then we can look at it as a whole. Because I think that's what the problem then, Jackson, wasn't it? That people, because there's a certain member for Fremington Way that
I thought about that myself.
yeah. But that the recommendation. Members, we have to do this. We're in breach of our responsibilities as we go.
Duty.
Yeah, exactly. Certainly. Would somebody move? Thank you very much. Those in favour then? Anyone against? That's carried.
Sorry, Chairman, I am going to have to go.
Right. Active travel.
Yeah, this is the
This
last
is
one.
you.
Oh, God.
So page 64 of appendix 2, this is quite a short one. This is actually one where we're not recommending to proceed through a partial review. It is a topic that has been raised through the member visioning workshops with reference to safe walking and cycling between residential areas and town centres, for example. There has been reference to the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan, the LC WIP, as well. So the table highlights the key sort of national policy, our strategic policy ST10, which is sets out examples of certain priorities and projects. And we also have policy DMO5 in the local plan, which again, the principles of sustainable travel come through that, and also policy DMO4. In terms of what's in scope, your officers do consider that it's not consider this area of work could be undertaken as part of the partial review. The LC WIPs are technical documents and they can't form part of the development plan, but they are a material consideration, so officers will have regard to them insofar as applications coming forward in areas where they apply. Policies ST10, DMO5 and DMO4, along with individual policy allocations, do enable sustainable transport to be considered. So we do feel the local plan is already operating with sustainable transport in mind. So I think it's probably just to jump straight to the recommendation is not to proceed with this matter through a partial review.
Thank you.
Well, Chair, yes, thank you. I think, yeah, if we're going for an SPD on climate change, that would be an element which would strengthen the policies.
Yeah, well. Councillor Jester, then Councillor.
Thank you. Just a quick one. We know that cycling, we put cycling paths in certain areas. And it's obviously better for the cyclists because for their health, it helps air pollution. But we cannot stop people parking on these sites. We've got one in Braunton and they park along it all day long. Please don't do anything about it unless we can fathom an answer for that. Cycle paths are not important to people these days. They cycle on the path rather than in the roadway.
I mean, we're very lucky in our county rep to Matt Collins, who is passionate about some of these issues and is pressing us all the time. I just got David first, Liz.
I was just going to move the recommendation.
I'm just backing up what Jasmine says, really. I think it's a county issue. They won't enforce it. It's just not, is it not civil, or what's the word for it? They can't stop people parking on it. I know. Why paint it there, you know?
I did have an email this morning from Andrew Davis, who apologised for not being here today, but I did answer and say it would be really, really good. We will let her have the dates, you know, that we've got, you know, please put them in your diary, because I think it is important that we can input through this process directly, you know, from a political point of view.
Yeah.
And I, you know, it'd be good if Matt Collins could find some time for the future meetings too.
Can I just also back up what's just been said by Jasmine? I said she's not called Jasmine, I was Jasmine. You don't not wide enough. The problem is the road also is so narrow with bigger and bigger and bigger lorries. When you have the car there, you have to go over the white line to just to not go into. It's very dangerous. But the countries seem indifferent.
Let's get them to come. I mean, I know that the HATOC is a reactive committee, really, isn't it?
Yes.
You know, we need some input now from the county on this. So I think if we can encourage them to come to these meetings.
There is a document in HATOC and also in One Northern Devon. Travel trip.
It's been proposed that we accept the recommendation that we don't proceed with this at the moment. That's say, yeah. Those in favour then? Anyone against? That's carried. Thank you. I think we've managed to get through the,
Yeah, so what we come back to again, and Sarah Jane did read this out before, which is the recommendation that's in your report, which is to sort of come back to that. So
we've
members,
done 2.1, haven't we?
you have, and then 2.2, it's to consider prioritising the items that could be taken forward in a partial update. And I
Do we
suppose
really need to do that?
I
When,
mean, it could be that, you know, there is a clear direction now
I
of
think,
the
really,
topics to further explore. I think the next stage is doing the additional work streams that are identified, looking at how that could look like in a programme of work, I think is key.
I'm going to say, Chair, yeah, we've looked at things to explore. We've not actually got down to particularly where we're going with them. So it is, you know, only another stage on. And the questions I want to ask is, how does this affect us being prepared to look at a new local plan in November 2024? So we've virtually ticked all the boxes. There's only two that we haven't. So how is that going to fit in with our workload and our schedule to be prepared to look at dealing with these issues properly when we get to a local plan in 2024?
One of the things, sorry, I think one of the things when we were looking at the topics, Councillor James, was to look at when we were considering whether to take forward or recommend to you today, whether we took forward in a partial update, was what information would then be relevant to transfer it over to a comprehensive review, should we find ourselves in that position. Ian hasn't stepped in, but I think all of the information we've talked about today and could then be transferred. So I don't think we're talking about any work that would be wasted.
yeah.
But the point about prioritising, should we be prioritising? There's some of those we need to be doing now, you know, and we put them into partial review. They need to be done now. And there's some that could be done as work towards the new local plan. So 2.2 is relevant in so much as we've just ticked the boxes on almost everything. We're going to look at it. What are we going to prioritise that needs to be done now? And what will be build-up work to a local plan? And from our council's point of view, we are looking at doing that. Preferably November 2024, but ASAP onwards. So there does need to be a prioritised way of tackling this. Otherwise, we're going to go, where are we going with it? Are you saying that we will keep working with all this work until we do it and not bother with a full local plan?
Well, I thought the framework that we're facing is that one of the reasons that we've looked at the partial review, we've got the government that's saying that they're going to do planning reforms on the day that the general election's likely to happen. I mean, all the vibes are that they're aiming at the autumn of 2024 for the general election. The budget points that way, and all the insiders are saying that. So what we can't assume is all those reforms are going to go through next November, shouldn't we? What I'm saying really, Ken, I think, or Councillor Jones, is that these are things that we've got the capacity, that we've got the resources, we've got the finances to deal with straight away. There'll be an election, and I imagine on the June meeting, members will talk about the issues that you just said. What else what other capacity have we got to get to that? I just don't think we've got the time this morning to be able to debate that in full. I think it's going to have to be an issue for that first meeting of the two new councils to look at in parallel to the stuff that we've agreed today. But it's a fair point to make.
Yeah, I think the reality of the situation is that we've got to keep it under review, haven't we? It's a little bit of crystal ball gazing at the moment. We've got a package of work here that we can proceed on, and that we can look at, that we think has got value going forward in the interim. Clearly, 3 months' time, we may know something different to what we know now. I think we keep that under review. It may be that we get through and we can adopt a partial update to the plan. It may be that we have to evolve that and members decide that we shift across to a new plan at some point. I think we just have to see where the circumstances take us but at least we got a direction of travel with this package of work that allows us to hopefully make some changes in the short term, whilst keeping that one eye on the sort of longer term.
I think we've probably got as far as we can today then. Can I just say to those of you seeking re-election, good luck. Thanks for your input in this process. And those that aren't standing again, thank you very much indeed. You know, I mean, your input again has been valuable.